In the busy town of Obolo, life was full of music, laughter, and neighbors who knew everything about each other's business. Chisholm had been walking with a smile on her face for weeks, believing her wedding day was finally close. She had already imagined herself in white, her friends singing around her, and her late father's blessings shining from heaven. But one evening as she entered UCHE's family compound with joy in her heart, the air suddenly grew heavy. His mother's voice was cold, sharper than a knife. "Chisholm," she said, "you are not good enough for our son. We have found him a perfect bride." Chisholm's hands trembled, her heart pounded in her chest, but she stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. They went on mocking her clothes, her family background, even her simple way of living. They spoke as if she was nothing, as if all her love and patience meant nothing. In that moment it felt like the ground was pulled away from her feet. Neighbors passing by could hear the harsh words, and by the time she left the compound with tears burning her eyes, the whole town was already whispering that Chisholm had been replaced. The humiliation did not end inside the compound. It spread out into the streets like wildfire. Wherever Chisholm went, she could feel the stares and hear the whispers. At the market, women who once greeted her warmly now looked at her with pity, shaking their heads as though she had done something wrong. Even children repeated the cruel words they had overheard from adults. She was not good enough. It was as if the whole town had taken sides against her. What made it worse was how proudly UCHE's family showed off the new bride, Edochie. She arrived in Obolo with expensive lace dresses that sparkled under the sun, gold jewelry that clinked when she walked, and a soft accent that made people nod in admiration. The family paraded her at every gathering, smiling as they introduced her as the perfect choice. At a friend's birthday, they made sure everyone saw Edochie serve food in her stylish heels, while they mocked Chisholm's old slippers and simple wrappers. "This is what a wife should look like," they said loudly, knowing Chisholm could hear. Even Chisholm's cooking, something she had always been praised for, became a tool for insult. UCHE's mother laughed in front of visitors, saying, "We were tired of watery soups and tasteless meals. Now Edochie cooks like a queen." The guests chuckled, though some lowered their eyes in discomfort. Still, the message was clear: Chisholm had been rejected, replaced, and humiliated in front of everyone who knew her. Each day felt like a wound reopening. She could not walk through the town without someone pointing or whispering. Yet she carried her pain silently, swallowing the tears that burned in her chest. At night she lay awake, her pillow wet, asking God why her love had turned into mockery. But deep inside, though broken, a quiet fire was beginning to burn. Something told her the story was not over yet. One afternoon, as the sun hung lazily over Obolo, a small boy knocked on Chisholm's door. In his tiny hands was a small box wrapped with no care, and on top of it lay a folded note. Confused, she took it and opened it slowly. Inside was the ring she had worn with so much pride, the same ring that had once made her believe her future was secure. Her heart sank. The note was short and cruel. "Chisholm, I cannot continue with you. My family has chosen better for me. Please return the memories we shared. UCHE." The words cut deeper than any blade. Her chest tightened, and for a long moment she could not breathe. By evening, the news had already spread across the town. In Obolo, nothing stayed hidden. People whispered at the roadside, in shops, and in the churchyard. She was replaced, they said, thrown aside like old clothes. Some mocked, some pitied, but everyone spoke of her. Chisholm felt the sting of shame each time she stepped outside. Neighbors who once smiled at her now gave her looks filled with gossip. Even her closest friends avoided her eyes, as if her broken engagement was contagious. That night, she sat on her bed, holding the ring in her palm, staring at it until her tears blurred her sight. She remembered how she had once admired it under the moonlight, believing it was a symbol of forever. Now it felt like a heavy chain tied to her pain. Slowly, she closed her fist around it and whispered through her sobs, "God, I will not fight them. You will fight for me." It was not the voice of anger but of surrender, of trust in something greater than the cruel judgment of men. Though her heart was shattered, something shifted within her that night. She wiped her face, lifted her head and told herself, "If they believe I am not enough, one day they will see. One day, heaven will answer for me." And with that vow, she held on, not knowing that destiny was already preparing a twist no one in Obolo could have imagined. As weeks passed, the name on everyone's lips was Edochie, the perfect bride. The town of Obolo seemed to revolve around her. Market women spoke of her expensive fabrics, tailors bragged about sewing her bridal gown, and caterers smiled with pride as they listed the dishes they would cook for her wedding feast. Every detail of the ceremony was discussed openly, as if the whole community was invited to share in her glory. Children sang songs about the coming wedding, and even church announcements carried whispers of the blessed union. UCHE herself moved through the streets like royalty. Each day she wore new outfits, glittering lace, heavy jewelry, handbags imported from abroad. She carried herself with confidence, greeting people with a polished smile that made many admire her, even if secretly they envied her. UCHE's family followed behind her proudly, showing her off like a prized treasure. "This is the kind of woman our son deserves," his mother would say loudly at gatherings, making sure Chisholm's name was buried in humiliation. Meanwhile, Chisholm lived in silence. The once hopeful bride became the ghost of her own dreams. She no longer joined neighbors at the stream or chatted with women in the evening breeze. She stayed indoors, her laughter gone, her voice soft, as though speaking too loudly might break her heart further. Friends who visited found her quiet but graceful, refusing to curse or complain. She listened, nodded, and carried her pain with dignity. But every word about UCHE's wedding was like salt rubbed into her wound. At night, when fireworks lit up the sky to celebrate UCHE's bridal shower, Chisholm sat by her window and watched in tears. The world celebrated another woman with the man she once loved, while she was treated as a discarded mistake. Yet deep inside, a strange calm began to settle in her. She did not know why, but something whispered to her spirit, "The story is not finished. The one who laughs last laughs best." And though
what no one in Obolo knew was that Chisholm's life was not as empty as they thought. Behind her quiet tears and simple wrappers was a truth she had never spoken. Her late father, Chief Okafor, had left her more than just memories. He had left her pieces of land across the town, a house in the city, and savings that many families could only dream of. But because Chisholm was raised with humility, she never boasted or waved her inheritance in people's faces. She walked in modesty, dressing simply, eating plainly, and living as though she had nothing, because her father had taught her that wealth without character was meaningless. Even after her father's passing, she had worked hard to honor him. While others laughed at her poverty, she was quietly building her own small company, a poultry and food supply business that was already providing jobs to many in neighboring towns. Every week, trucks left her farm loaded with crates of eggs, chickens, and produce, supplying restaurants and markets. The money flowed steadily, but Chisholm chose to invest it wisely, not spend it carelessly. She had no need to prove herself to those who mocked her. Yet, when UCHE's family rejected her, calling her poor and unworthy, she felt a stab of irony in her heart. If only they knew the truth. If only they realized that the girl they pushed aside in shame was already richer than the perfect bride they flaunted so proudly. But Chisholm did not reveal it. She never tried to defend herself with money or titles. She simply bowed her head and endured, believing that dignity spoke louder than wealth paraded in pride. And so, while UCHE's wedding preparations filled the streets with noise and glitter, Chisholm's life was quietly shining in a way no one could yet see. Her pain was real, but so was her strength. She carried her secret like a hidden crown, waiting for the day when truth would no longer be hidden. A day was coming when her silence would echo louder than the drums of UCHE's wed.
The morning of the wedding finally arrived, and Obolo woke up buzzing with excitement. From the crack of dawn, women were already at the stream fetching water and humming wedding songs. The streets were alive with colors, cars decorated with ribbons, and children running about, laughing and chasing each other. The church, one of the largest in town, was filled beyond its doors. People who were not even invited squeezed in just to witness the grand day. It was not just a wedding, it was the event of the year. UCHE's family arrived in style, stepping out of shiny cars with their heads held high. His mother wore a wrapper made of the finest lace, sparkling in the sun, while his father walked tall in his flowing agbada, nodding proudly at the crowd. They spoke loudly, greeting guests with words that carried pride. "Today our son marries the right woman," his father said, patting shoulders. His mother added, "At last we can be proud of our choice." Laughter and admiration followed them everywhere. Inside the church, UCHE sat gracefully at the front, her gown glittering like diamonds, her veil carefully arranged to perfection. Guests gasped at her beauty, murmuring that she looked like a queen. Drummers outside beat rhythms that echoed joy, while choirs rehearsed hymns that would fill the air once the vows began. Every corner of the church spoke of celebration. But in all that noise and brightness, there was an unspoken silence too. Some older women whispered quietly to one another, remembering Chisholm. They shook their heads, their voices low. This girl they pushed aside, does anyone know where she is today? Yet their words were quickly drowned by more laughter and praise for Edochie. As the priest prepared the altar and the ushers rushed around to seat guests, UCHE himself walked in, proud and smiling, shaking hands and nodding at the praises showered on him. To him this was his perfect day, proof that he had upgraded his life. He stood tall, not knowing. Just when everyone thought the wedding would move smoothly, the heavy wooden doors of the church opened slowly, and a hush swept across the hall. Every head turned. There in the doorway stood Chisholm. She was not wearing the glitter of Edochie or the flashy lace that the women of Obolo adored. Instead, she wore a simple but breathtaking Ankara gown, perfectly tailored to her frame. Around her neck and wrists coral beads glowed softly, carrying the quiet dignity of tradition. Her hair was neatly packed, her face bare except for a touch of powder, and yet she looked radiant, as if pain had polished her into gold. For a moment the church seemed to stop breathing. Guests blinked in surprise. Then the whispers began to ripple through the pews. "Is that not Chisholm?" someone whispered. "Why is she here?" another asked. Some gasped in shock, others leaned forward to get a better view. A few women lowered their voices and muttered, "After all that humiliation, she still has the courage to come?" But Chisholm did not look left or right. She walked with calm steps, her eyes steady, her head lifted high. She carried no bitterness in her face, no anger in her stride. Instead, there was a strange grace about her, as though she knew something no one else did. Every bead on her neck seemed to whisper strength, every step echoed confidence. Edochie, sitting in her glittering gown, stiffened at the sight. Her smile faded, and her fingers clutched the bouquet too tightly. UCHE's mother frowned deeply, whispering to those beside her, "What insolence! How dare she show her face here?" UCHE himself turned pale, his smile faltering as his eyes followed the woman he had discarded. Chisholm walked to the side pew, sat quietly, and bowed her head as though she had only come to worship, not to disturb. Yet her presence alone disturbed the peace of every heart. She looked too calm for a woman who was supposed to be broken. And in that moment many felt a strange tension in the air. The drums outside grew silent, the choir ended their hymn, and the church bells rang softly as the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The vows. Guests leaned forward, eager to hear Edochie and UCHE seal their union with holy words. Edochie adjusted her veil, her smile returning as she prepared to claim the spotlight. UCHE stood tall, chest out, as if the whole town should admire him for securing the perfect bride. At the altar, the priest shuffled the official marriage documents, adjusting his glasses carefully. His hands moved slowly, almost deliberately, as though heaven itself was guiding his every action. He looked down at the papers, then up at the couple, then back again. His brow furrowed. A tiny pause stretched longer than anyone expected. The church grew restless. A cough here, a shifting chair there, whispers beginning to rise. Then the priest cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the silence, cutting through the murmurs. Instantly the entire church fell quiet. Even the children stopped fidgeting, all eyes fixed on him. He glanced once more at the documents, then at UCHE's parents who sat proudly in the front row. Their smiles froze as they noticed his expression was not the usual cheerful one. Something was off. The priest straightened himself, lifted his eyes, and spoke slowly but firmly. "My beloved people of God," he began, his voice steady. "Before we continue, I must address a matter that cannot be ignored." The weight in his tone sent chills through the hall. Guests exchanged nervous looks. Edochie's hand tightened on her bouquet, and UCHE frowned in confusion, shifting uneasily. The priest's eyes swept the church, as if searching for someone among the crowd. The air grew heavy, and even the decorations seemed to lose their shine. Everyone leaned closer, hearts thumping, breaths held. Something was about to be revealed, and in that thick silence, the moment felt like the calm before a storm. No one spoke, no. The priest adjusted his glasses once more, his fingers trembling slightly as he held the marriage register. The silence in the church was so deep that even the sound of a paper turning seemed loud. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "This union cannot proceed." His words fell like thunder in the hall. A wave of gasps swept across the pews. Some people thought they had misheard him. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, waiting for him to explain. UCHE blinked in shock, his smile collapsing. Oluchi's bouquet slipped slightly in her hand. The priest lifted the register higher, his voice stronger now. According to the official documents before me, the bride named here is not Miss Oluchi Nwafor. He paused deliberately, letting the words sink in. A thick silence followed, every heart pounding, every ear straining. Then came the words that shook the entire church. The legal bride on this document is Miss Chisholm Okafor. The name rang through the church like a bell. Whispers exploded instantly. Chisholm? Did he say Chisholm? Some muttered. How is that possible? Others asked. People turned their heads toward where she sat quietly in her simple Ankara gown. Chisholm did not flinch, did not move. She simply raised her eyes slowly, her face calm, her presence powerful in its stillness. Oluchi's jaw dropped, her face drained of color. The confidence she had carried for weeks disappeared in a second. UCHE's mother pressed her hand to her chest, as if her heart had skipped a beat, while his father shook his head in disbelief, whispering, "This cannot be happening." The priest, unmoved by the commotion, closed the register firmly and looked straight at the couple before him. By the law of this land and the records of this church, I cannot bless any union other than the one written here. And it is not with Miss Oluchi. The words settled like fire on dry grass, spreading shock and awe. The wedding that was supposed to be the proudest day for UCHE's family had just. The church broke into chaos the moment the priest finished speaking. Gasps filled the air, loud enough to drown out the choir's instruments. People jumped to their feet, some clutching their heads, others covering their mouths in shock. The whispers grew into loud voices, a wave of disbelief rolling across the hall. Chisholm? How can it be Chisholm? Is this a mistake? But they replaced her. The entire congregation buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Oluchi's hand shook violently as she held her bouquet. Her lips trembled, and for the first time since she arrived in Abalo, her confidence was gone. She glanced around the church, her eyes wide, desperate for someone to rescue her from the humiliation. But no one moved. Her fingers lost strength, and the bouquet slipped to the floor. UCHE's mother clutched her wrapper tightly, her eyes darting from the priest to Chisholm. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The proud woman who had boasted for weeks was now struck silent, her face pale with shame. Beside her, UCHE's father rubbed his forehead in disbelief, muttering under his breath, "This is impossible. This is impossible." At the altar, UCHE himself stood frozen, his legs weak, his chest heaving. He could not look at Chisholm, could not look at the crowd. His entire world seemed to crumble before his eyes. The woman he had mocked, the fiancée he had thrown away, was written in law as his true bride. His pride fell to the ground heavier than stones. Guests shook their heads, murmuring, "So all this show, all this boasting for nothing?" Others whispered, "This is God's judgment. You cannot mock a woman's heart and escape." Even those who once laughed at Chisholm now looked at her with new respect, their eyes softening with awe. The wedding that was meant to be the grandest celebration in Abalo had turned into a stage of disgrace. And at the center of it all sat Chisholm, quiet, dignified, her name sealed on the documents that silenced every mocking tongue. UCHE stood at the altar as though the ground beneath him had given way. His chest tightened, his throat felt dry, and sweat broke out on his forehead despite the cool air inside the church. For a moment, he could not hear the voices around him, only the loud thumping of his own heart. The words of the priest echoed again and again in his head. The legal bride is Miss Chisholm Okafor. Shame poured over him like boiling water. He remembered every moment he had discarded Chisholm, the day he sent back her ring without a second thought, the way he had mocked her simple clothes, the cruel silence when his family humiliated her. He had thought himself wise, rising higher by choosing Oluchi, the so-called perfect woman. But now, in front of the entire community, he stood small, reduced, exposed. The very bride he rejected was the one heaven and law declared as his. His legs weakened, and he gripped the altar rail for balance. Some guests noticed his hands trembling, his face pale, his lips pressed tight as though fighting tears. Pride had always been his crown, but now it slipped from his head. He could not meet Chisholm's eyes. Her calmness cut deeper than any insult. She sat there dignified while he stood shaking, his arrogance stripped bare. Oluchi glanced at him in disbelief, her own shame mixing with anger. She tugged at his sleeve but he pulled away, his body too heavy with regret. Uchena's parents avoided his gaze, unable to offer comfort or rescue. They too had fallen under the weight of their own pride. In that moment, Uchenna felt the judgment of heaven pressing on him. He had traded true love for show, humility for vanity, dignity for pride, and lost everything. He bowed his head, his voice breaking in a whisper only he could hear. God, what have I done? The man who once walked proudly through Abalo was now crushed under the very weight of his choices, and as the congregation looked on, it was clear that his downfall had only just begun. The church was no longer the same. What had started as a day of celebration now felt like a court of judgment, and the crowd became the jury. Everywhere, people leaned close to one another, their voices rising and falling in whispers that carried both shock and satisfaction. So she was the chosen one all along, an old woman murmured, shaking her head slowly. They mocked her, but her name was already written where it mattered most. Men who had once praised Uchenna for upgrading stood with folded arms, their faces grim. This is what pride does, one of them said under his breath. When you throw away a good woman because she looks simple, you invite shame. Another added, his family thought they were wise, but see how their pride has ended them. Some of the women glanced at Chisholm with tears in their eyes. This girl swallowed insults quietly, but heaven was fighting for her, they whispered. She never cursed them, never argued, and today God himself has answered for her. Others nudged their daughters, saying, learn from her patience. Not every battle is fought with words. Meanwhile, Uchenna's family sat frozen, their heads bowed as the judgment of the people pierced them like arrows. Once they had walked proudly through Abalo, boasting of their son's perfect bride. Now they sat in silence, unable to defend themselves. Their arrogance had been stripped naked before the entire town. Oluchi's friends, who had once paraded her beauty, looked away in shame. This is too much, one whispered, covering her face. All her pride is gone in a single moment. And in the middle of it all, Chisholm sat still, her eyes lowered, her spirit calm. She did not gloat, she did not smile. Yet the whispers around her turned her silence into victory. Every guest could see it clearly. The one they despised was the one heaven had chosen. And as the murmurs filled the church, the story of the day had already begun to spread beyond those walls, carried by every tongue that. Slowly, Chisholm rose from her seat. The wooden bench creaked softly, and the entire church turned to her as if pulled by an unseen force. She did not rush, she did not frown. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her ankara gown glowing gently under the light streaming through the stained glass windows. Her coral beads rested on her chest like a crown, and though her face was calm, her presence filled the hall with authority. She walked a few steps closer to the front, her eyes steady, her back straight. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but strong, carrying to every corner of the church. Respect, she said, pausing so her words could sink in, is not bought with money or beauty. Respect is earned by character, by truth, and by the heart. A ripple of silence swept over the guests. Her eyes moved briefly to Uchenna and his family, then to Oluchi, before she lifted her head higher. You rejected me, she continued, her tone calm but firm. But heaven never rejected me. You mocked my simplicity, but God has made it my strength. Today you all see that no one's destiny can be replaced. The church grew still. Some people's eyes filled with tears. Others bowed their heads in shame, unable to meet her gaze. Even those who had once laughed at her felt their hearts pierced. Her words carried no bitterness, only truth, and it burned sharper than anger ever could. Uchenna lowered his head, his shoulders heavy with regret. His parents' eyes stung with shame. Oluchi shifted uneasily, her face pale, her pride shattered. But Chisholm did not speak to wound them. She spoke for herself, for every woman who had been told she was not enough, for every person cast aside unfairly. And in that moment her voice was more powerful than the drums, the songs, and the boasting that had filled Abalo for weeks. When she sat back down, the silence in the church was not empty. It was full, heavy with respect. Chisholm had not only reclaimed her dignity, she had risen above them. The weight of silence pressed on Uchenna's family like a heavy stone. Moments ago they had walked into the church with their shoulders high, boasting loudly about their son's perfect bride. But now their heads hung low, their voices stolen by shame. Every whisper in the church was like a slap, every stare like fire burning their skin. They had mocked Chisholm, paraded Oluchi, and insulted her background, yet before the whole town, the truth had humiliated them. Uchena's mother, who had been the loudest in her rejection of Chisholm, could not lift her eyes. Her hands trembled as she clutched her wrapper, trying to steady herself. Uchena's father, once so proud of his family's decision, wiped sweat from his forehead, his chest heaving as though he had run a long race. Their arrogance had been shattered in one moment, and they knew it. Oluchi, the woman they had praised as flawless, could not bear the eyes of the crowd. The whispers stung her ears, the pitying glances cut her pride into pieces. Tears welled in her eyes, and though she tried to stand tall, her steps betrayed her. Quietly, almost desperately, she slipped out of the church, her head bowed. The fine jewelry, the designer dress, the confidence she carried when she walked in, all of it suddenly looked empty. She had been paraded as the bride, only to leave as a stranger in disgrace. People shook their heads, murmuring, "See how pride has fallen. See how God lifts the humble." The once boastful family now sat in silence, too ashamed to defend themselves. Even their close friends shifted away, unwilling to share in their humiliation. In that moment, everyone realized that dignity was not in wealth, beauty, or pride. It was in truth, in patience, and in the quiet strength Chisholm had carried all along. The family that rejected her could not look up, and the perfect bride who had replaced her walked away in tears. Obolo town would not forget that scene. The proud brought low, and the rejected woman st. All across Obolo, the story spread faster than fire in dry grass. People could not stop talking about what had happened in the church that day. They spoke of Chisholm, the young woman who had been mocked, rejected, and pushed aside for another, yet in the end, her name was the one written in the marriage register. It was as if heaven itself had spoken for her. Women whispered her story in the marketplace, repeating her words about respect not being bought with money or beauty. Men in palm wine joints shook their heads, saying, "Truly, pride goes before a fall." Even children carried the tale home, wide-eyed as they explained how the perfect bride ran away in tears while Chisholm stood tall in grace. Her dignity touched everyone. She had not shouted, she had not fought, yet she defeated the insults with patience and quiet strength. Her rejection became her crown, and the same people who once mocked her now admired her. Uchena's family, once so proud, became an example of what happens when arrogance blinds the heart. The tale grew bigger with every retelling, reaching villages beyond Obolo. People said, "Did you hear of the woman they called unworthy, but whose name was honored before all?" Chisholm's story became more than gossip. It became a lesson that destiny cannot be stolen, that patience is never wasted, and that those who stand with dignity will always rise in the end.